Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're transitioning rooms and a little technical difficulties here back and forth, but welcome everyone. My name is Catherine Eaton, known as Kathy. I am the current secretary for the AADA division. So on behalf of AADA, we are proud and thankful that you all are coming here today. I have a couple different roles. I am also the executive director and former president of the Maryland Counseling Association. I have my own private practice, and I'm also a clinical supervisor for a school-based program in Maryland. And forgive me if I go a little fast or go through these slides, as I'm working on a different computer. So we will have some chat available for anything else. So again, I'm originally from Gaithersburg, Maryland, coming down here in North Carolina to have myself a little break after a couple years with the pandemic. I'm a board-approved clinical supervisor. I completed my degree in pastoral counseling and clinical mental health at Loyola University, Maryland in May 2011. So I've been in practice for a little bit. And as I said, secretary of AADA, there is more positions available with AADA if you want to get more involved. So please chat with me after the group. So I first heard the term neurodivergence from an ACA presentation a few years ago by Dr. Nicole Nugent, PhD. I had never heard of that term before. And then more and more it's been in the social media, it's been online as just a way to describe both attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder, of which most likely I have ADHD, although being a child in the 70s, I was not diagnosed because it was not recognized as a girl problem back in the 70s. The term was first coined, the best I can do to see is in 1988 by Dr. Judy Singer, herself who was autistic, and it was a way to move away from the medical model as something to be fixed or treated rather than something to be embraced, that this is how my brain processes, this is how it works, and it's not wrong, it's just different. And so again, there is a very strong growing population, a lot in social media that I'll talk about later in the slides. But neurodivergence now has expanded to include not just ADHD and autism spectrum, but also dyscalculia and dyslexia and dyspraxia and other brain syndromes, including Tourette syndrome, which was new to me. That was fascinating that that was included as well. So there are plenty of resources for children, youth, and teens that are lucky enough to have a diagnosis and to get those support systems while they're in school. Or once they get to the point where they're graduating from high school and transitioning into adult life, there is not as much of a support network and not a clear path on how to give them support. And there is also the privilege of getting a diagnosis at a younger age, because again, women and girls still are not fully recognized as having autism, as having ADHD, because it presents differently, and minorities are still often overlooked with having these conditions. And so if you don't have it labeled, even though I don't like labels in general, we can't get the right supports to make it work for you instead of against you, which is mostly how I approach my clients, with more of a positive based. Okay, you're ADHD, great. There are some gifts with that and some struggles. And so how do we make the gifts work for you instead of against you? So one of the biggest problems is challenges of learned helplessness. Oh, I'm ADHD, I just can't remember anything. Okay. We have these computers now, and you can put reminders in your computers to take medicine. You can put reminders in your computers of, oh, I have a paper due. You have different activities, things. I grew up in the 70s. It was old school where I would put physical paper notes up on the refrigerator to remind myself of things, because I'm a visual learner. Other folks are more auditory. And so now with the computers, we can do recorded notes to do those auditory reminders. And so again, it's kind of exploring what strengths, what abilities your clients have, and then how to engage that with everything else. And what's interesting is a lot of the younger folks who grew up with the technology are liking the old school interventions of having a color coordinated folder, of having markers to write things down. Another challenge is there is still a lot of stigma attached to even having ADHD, that there's a fear of disclosure. If I disclose to my professor, hey, I have ADHD, I need extended time because I need an extra little bit to coordinate how I'm going to get all my papers due and all my classes, there's a fear that the instructor is going to look at them as less than, that the instructor is going to hold them to a different standard. Oh, you know, you're in special ed, you know, and not as welcome in that space. As far as workplace, some workplaces are very good about embracing folks with diversity, with neurodivergence, to, you know, bring them into the workforce. And other places of work, if they understand that you have a disability, they may limit your career aspirations. They may pigeonhole you into a smaller entry level position instead of looking at, well, sure, you could be department chair. You know, so again, and it's, I have a lot of clients that would ask me, should I disclose? And so then we talk about what legally you can disclose and what your choice is to disclose. And so if you say, I have a disability, here are my accommodations through HR, that's all you have to say. You don't have to say anything else. But sometimes it's helpful to say, hey, you know what? I'm a little ADHD and I do better with lists. So if you come by my cubicle and say, hey, I need you to take care of XYZ, I need to stop and write it down, or I'm going to forget 5 seconds later. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's helpful to, oh, that's how you work. Okay, we'll make sure you have lists. We'll make sure you have a written prompt to pop up in your computer. And for other people, like, oh, I don't have time to repeat it again. And then how much do you push that in a workplace environment when at this time of year and this time of pandemic, any job is a good job? So with working with, you know, emerging adults, it's important to use a patient-centered goal, and again, the strength-based approach. What would work best for them? Sometimes we have parental overreach because they're protective against them, or they're so used to doing everything for their child, and they're, oh, well, you're in college now, go ahead and handle it, without having that bridge and scaffolding of, how do I get from my mom helped me do this to how do I do this on my own when I'm in college or if I'm in the workforce? And then sometimes it's, do they even want to pursue college? Do they even want to work at this point? I would encourage folks to consider a gap year, which the parents 99% of the time said, what do you mean? We worked so hard to graduate. What do you mean taking a gap year? But a lot of folks who are neurodivergent are not as emotionally developed as some of the neurotypical people. And taking a year off to then verify, what do I want to pursue for higher education? What do I want to pursue for a workforce? Instead of jumping right in, can be a good pause. And I know the fear is, if I don't go on this direct pathway, then something bad might happen, or I might never go to college, or I might never get a job. So then we look at the LMF thinking patterns, and again, tease out what do our clients want versus what does the family want. There are lots of assessments to assist with career direction. What I find interesting is most high schools have the students complete one in freshman year. And by the time they get to senior year, they totally forget that they took the assessment. They forget what the results were. And so it's novel. I've had some college graduates struggling with career direction. And so, well, let's start over with the ONET. Let's look at here to see. And they're like, oh, wow, I never took this before. And I'm thinking, you may have, but, you know, let's start here. And where does this, you know, what does this show you as different opportunities that match the personality to where is it you want to go for a career? There's also having to do some reality-based. There's many high school grads that are expecting to make $50,000 a year with a high school education. I don't know anywhere in the US where that is a normative salary expectation. And so how do we adjust? What do we want with how do we get there? And also, again, advocating for self-determination, because in a lot of families, mom's a doctor, dad's a doctor, they expect the child then to be a lawyer or a doctor. And maybe they're drawn into the arts. Maybe they're drawn into different, maybe engineering with hands that doesn't necessarily have the same clout, so to speak, with a career direction. And it's good to know what are the additional resources, because your client is coming to you once, maybe twice a week. You are not the end all be all expert, but then to have them, hey, why don't you check out this resource or that resource? And then having a full discussion about accommodations, either in academia or in the workplace. Again, what works for you? Very simple is writing down tasks to check them off on a to-do list, but other folks need other realistic accommodations. And then having to educate your client, what is a reasonable accommodation? If I hired someone to work in my counseling office who used a wheelchair and the wheelchair wouldn't fit under the desk, I need to accommodate that. I do not need to spend $2,000 on a new desk, but I could get some risers to lift the desk up so then the wheelchair can fit under there. So it is easy to do, but I'd have to make sure that then there's no risk of falling or anything else. So again, reasonable accommodations. And what might be reasonable to a client may not be reasonable to, say, an academic situation. And what we're finding a lot now is when we had to pivot to online learning, for some folks, it was a struggle. For some folks, it was great. It was fabulous. And now with the transition to go back to in-person, face-to-face learning, then they're losing that online access. And now we're having to fight for that, for accessibility, to have that option that, yes, I know planning a Zoom or doing a hybrid teaching is more difficult, but we did have some students that did flourish better with this learning style. And so what would you do if your client was unwilling to pursue school or training or the workforce? Any thoughts or feedback? Mm-hmm.
Transportation, this is important to you.
I like that.
Right. So it's a little more reality based of, yeah, high school was hard. I understand wanting to take a break, but you have to do something. You have to have some income, even if you're lucky enough to have Social Security disability income. It certainly doesn't pay a lot of the bills. It certainly doesn't cover a lot of the expenses.
They're like, okay, I want to build a tree house and disconnect from the world. Like, that's what you want.
Right. And, that's also very important as far as not pushing our values onto the client. And so most of us are in the field and working and have a job. And if someone is not able or cannot imagine, the fear of failure, that I even getting away from the social anxiety of, I don't want to do an interview. What if I don't get it? What if to like, I can't imagine myself working at this moment in time. Okay, so what can we do in the meantime to address those anxieties and fears? What can we do as an alternative to build some job skills so that then you are a better applicant? Because with the changing economy, there are still 500 people vying for that one job at Panera. There are 500 people looking for that one entry-level position at Amazon. It is a challenge. And again, coping with the parental pressure. Oh, they're just sitting around all day not doing anything. You know, oh, when I was their age, I had a job. I had 2 jobs. Yeah, and the economy was a lot different back then. And also addressing the comorbid conditions, because a lot of folks who are neurodivergent have anxiety, have depression, and some of the symptomology actually overlaps so much. And it's like, how do we tease what is the anxiety or what is the ADHD? What is I need to order and it's OCD, or is it I need to order because I need to make sure I have a clean desk before I start on a project? And not to pathologize it, but just, how do we kind of embrace where the client is and then, hey, have you tried this? Let's try this. Let me know how it goes. Come back next week. Nope, that made it worse. Okay, good information to have. What worked when you were a kid? Well, my mom did it. Okay. So if you were your mom telling you, what would you? I don't want to listen. Okay, gotcha. What could we try different? Oh, I had a favorite teacher who did it by color. Okay, so what will we need to get it? Well, that costs money. That I said, but if it might help, let's have a conversation, because we might be able to go to Target in the clearance aisle and get some color coded things instead of maybe going to an art supply store where the same color coded things might be less affordable. So, looking at different options and trying to think outside the box. So again, going with the assessments of the ONET, the Department of Labor has that as an online resource that you start to say, where could I possibly go as a career? And you need to let folks know that it is 60 questions. For some people, more than 3 questions is a lot. I have done the assessments in the session, pulling up my laptop and letting them do it right there and then. But not everybody has internet, or if you're doing telehealth, you can't open 2 windows and keep it secure. And so there's different things like that. And so you can give it as a homework assignment and then say, well, go ahead and take this and bring it back and then we can discuss it. And some clients are good of looking at the rest of the tools on the workforce development site that look at potential salary, that look at education level to get to different jobs. If, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I could do this. And again, a lot of the careers that have been stable over time, a lot of them evaporated overnight with the pandemic. Some of those jobs are coming back, some are not. And so some of the data on these federal sites are old or no longer apply. But one thing that is stable over time is resume writing is a great tool to help with self-esteem. That it's a challenge for a lot of people to kind of talk yourself up and say, what am I good at? And for some folks that are, transitioning out of high school, they may never have written a resume before. They don't even know where to start. And you can say, well, Word has a template for high school graduate. Let's start there. Let's look at a functional resume, because a lot of parents are coming from, I'm going to say old fashioned, but from traditional point of view of doing a chronological resume. And if someone hasn't had any jobs before, that doesn't really work. That doesn't really highlight what they do. And so again, looking at the resume and they say, well, this and this. I say, well, do you do email? Well, sure. Okay, let's put email on your resume. I don't know how to do a fax machine. Okay, are you willing to learn how to do a fax machine? Did you know there's other electronic things? You know, how about PowerPoint? How about Paint Shop? Oh yeah, those are, and I'll disclose that those came along after me. They're not in my skill set, but that it's a very valuable to have. And so go ahead and put those on the resume, that those are helpful in one shape or form. Another thing is to highlight their experience with earning their student service learning hours, which a lot of high schools require that as part of their graduation requirements. And so if they're on the recycle team in their high school and all they did was collect paper and dump it in the recycle, but you still had an understanding of logistics, you still had an understanding of how to time these tasks, and all these things are important in our job skills. These are your strengths versus they're coming at it, why I don't know a thing, I don't have any job skills, I haven't gone to college, and that can help boost the self-esteem. That can kind of boost of, okay, if you have these job skills from this experience, then where does that work for a career? Where does that work for other things? And again, there's some gaps in some teaching the communication skills. I had one student and the task was to apply for an internship. And they just said, go apply for an internship. And if you don't have any scaffolding of where do I go to look for an internship? What kind of internship do I need? What do I need to apply? Again, for me personally, lists, having a checklist of go here to this website, go here to these things. You will need to prepare your resume. You will need to prepare 5 questions you might have on an interview, a step-by-step guideline. And a lot of times I think there's this expectation of this should just kind of be organic and you should just know how to do it. And with a lot of emerging adults, they don't know. And so then there's this frustration from parents and teachers saying, well, just go do it. And the students are like, I don't know how, I don't know where to start. And a lot of folks get overwhelmed and then just shut down and withdraw and don't try. And then folks misunderstand that shutting down as being resistant, as being oppositional, as being disengaged, when they just truly don't have the recipe. How do I write an email back to someone who says, great, let's set up an interview? How do you even say the words? What are the words? How do I write a thank you after an interview? So again, learning how to kind of look for these gaps, and even my own personal biases. I'm thinking, well, do you know how to do this? And I don't want to come across as condescending. Have you done this before? Oh yeah, I did. Great. Okay, have you done this piece? And forgive me if I'm going to go step by step, because I want to make sure that we're fully getting the whole picture. And let me know if I'm going too fast. Let me know if this doesn't make sense. And a lot of times it's taking this great big project and breaking it down into smaller pieces that are more, because if you, applying to college, that's a big process. And a lot of it is online. And I would tell my clients how I had to do it. I had to go to the printer and get my essay printed and go to the post office and get it postmarked. And it was a different process. And in some ways it was a lot easier to physically check everything off, put it in an envelope and send it, versus trying to import files, trying to make sure everybody has everything on a deadline, and then trusting that other people are going to remember to upload those files to my portal on the deadline. I see some shaking heads that it's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And again, it's interesting watching the transition of tech over time, how some of the old school things are really coming back to just have that physical connection to things. So again, advocating for self-determination. I have some strong feelings about self-determination, having raised 4 kids and each of them with IEPs in the school system, and having to walk into the school and demand teachers not following the IEP, teachers not giving the support system as needed, and to really fight and advocate for what was needed. And then the school pushing back and saying, well, you know, your student's a little older now and they should self-advocate and they should be able to do it. But again, an 18-year-old kid still might be emotionally 13, still might be terrified of going to the teacher who has the power to say, hey, remember, you're supposed to give me a checklist, and doesn't want to stand out in the classroom, having everybody know that they need a checklist, or B, have the teacher get angry. Oh, I can't believe I got to do a checklist for you. Everybody else doesn't need a checklist. And having this, well, because they reach a certain age, they should be able to do it on their own. And they should be able to figure it out on their own when they really need some safety nets. So again, I do a strength-based approach and then modeling how to teach, how to self-advocate. So then if I disclose that I have ADHD and I do better with writing things down, and I'll even circle back. Remember when we're in session and Miss Kathy gets a sticky note to remember to write that letter? I said I would go to my boss and say, hey, wait, slow down a minute. You're talking too fast. I need to write this down, please. And mostly it's just a very normative kind of, this is how I, you know, hey, you know, I do better if I write things down. So wait, hold that thought just a moment. Hey, that's great. Can you just email me those 3 points so I have it in writing so I can go back to it? To just modeling how to gently advocate, and you know, not to minimize their symptoms and not to maximize to say, oh gosh, you know, it's so awful having, you know, ADHD and can't remember anything. No, we can. Just it takes a lot of effort. And if you're trying to remember XYZ, adding ZQW is too much. And usually it's a power of 3, but sometimes it's a power of 1. And so we might remember to brush our teeth, and we might forget to bring our laptop. And normalizing that you know, mistakes happen, and then how do we pivot and keep going again into problem solving. So if this tool of writing things down has worked for years, okay, wait, now I'm in a lab situation in school, now I'm in a lab situation at work, was writing things down isn't necessarily going to be helpful at this point in time. So how do we come up with different interventions to see, and then having the client come up with, well, you know, what used to work for you before? What have you tried before it didn't work? What if we tried something differently using some technology? What if we tried using non-technology? And then again, with the parental involvement, and I will admit that myself as a parent, I would still probably do a little too much for my kids. I would give them a list of 3 things to do after school and the timeline of after school, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. For those 3 hours, I don't care if you do it 5 minutes before 6 or if you do it at 3:05, but sometime in those 3 hours. So again, giving them a little self-determination. I want you to do these 3 tasks. And then when they transition to adulthood, I thought they could just do their own 3 things. They were still expecting me to write the 3 tasks down. And I'm still struggling with that. And that's, you know, that's okay. But again, how do we help the parental involvement to be that safety net without having the parents kind of hold on to the apron string for too long? You know, how do we address the real fear from the client's perspective of mom and dad are going to be upset if I drop out of school and I just want to work when they want me to get a degree? So there are not specific resources per se for neurodivergent adults, but there are different federal resources. So one is the Department of Rehabilitative Services, DOORS, which is a federal program. And so if your client is officially diagnosed and if they meet the income requirements, then they would be applicable to get services from the Department of Rehabilitative Services. And sometimes that's helpful for clients. For some clients, they'll go and they'll say, you know, that was really a drag. They wanted to get me a job, any job, instead of help me get my dream job. And it wasn't a good fit, but it's good to kind of know what is available. I've also referred out to other private practices that have a specialty focus on ADHD and autism. If they're the specialists for that, I mean, I consider myself more as a journalist and I can do what I do. But if there is someone else that has more expertise, hey, why don't you work with this person over here to see, you know, what's going on, or to cross collaborate. They, you know, for continuing education, hey, go see other, you know, professional development seminars on how to incorporate different things. I have made myself very familiar on how to apply for accommodations at both the community college and the major universities within my state. So I can coach my client on, well, if you would like accommodations, you need to do this part, and then I can do this part, this part, this part. And sometimes it's the first time for emerging adults that they're signing their own release of protective health information forms. And why am I signing this? And how about this? And okay, we signed it this year and we'll need to sign it again next year to get these accommodations for classroom or to get the accommodations for work. Some of the workplace accommodations would be having a steady work schedule. And for some work environments, part of the job description is having a flexible schedule. And so on the face of it, it says that might not be an easy accommodation, but for other workplace environments, oh yeah, we have a lot of folks with, you know, accommodations. And so they have a steady day shift people, and they have a steady mid shift people, and they have a steady evening shift people. And that actually does better for the work environment so that they can have all the schedules covered. And again, having someone who needs repetition, who needs stability, having that work schedule without that variability of, oh, am I working Friday morning? Am I working Friday night? Am I working Friday at all? Do I need a regular day off during the week so I can study? Do I need a regular day off so I can attend to my doctor's appointments? And writing all those things in. And again, coaching the client that they don't have to disclose why, but just that I have a disability, or hey, I have an accommodation, not even disclosing that's a disability. Hey, I have an accommodation through HR. I need every Thursday off. And then a little bit of reality based of, okay, if you're in retail and you ask for Thursdays off and the holidays come around, to be a good team player, you might have to work on a holiday. And then depending on the religion and family systems of the client, if you need off for a holiday, in January, you want to ask off for Thanksgiving. If Thanksgiving is a great big family gathering, you put in your request off in January that I need Thanksgiving off, even though we're expected to work holidays. Most businesses have 5 holidays off a year. And for some retail businesses, they'll expect you to work 4 of the 5. There's not a lot of places that expect you to work all the holidays, 365, 7 days a week, all the time. So looking into, again, being familiar with the different workplace environments that your folks work with, or asking the client, hey, historically, have you been able to do this? Have you been able to do that? So the Americans with Disability Act actually just recently passed its 31st anniversary this year. And what was interesting is among legislators, there has been recent discussion on how to expand that current law. That at the time it was revolutionary to give accommodations to help Americans with disabilities to be more engaged in the workforce, to have more access and barriers to be more independently living. But there is a lot more work to do. And for some folks who have Social Security disability income, there are limits to how much money you can make. And in some jobs, if you are labeled as a disabled worker, then, you know, by federal law, they can pay you a lower wage than everyone else. And that's helpful to keep you within your monetary limits so you don't lose your benefits. But some of those benefits haven't been adjusted in 20 years. And so in my state, the average Social Security disability income is $700 a month. And out of that, 30% is rent. And then how do you live on the rest? And then you're not allowed to have significant savings or retirement. So again, it's good that the legislators are looking at that law to modify it. So again, being able to live with dignity, being able to live respectfully, and having accessibility to, you know, having access to career and everything. So again, one of the future implications is actually raising the minimum wage for disabled workers. In particular, I had a client who worked at a farm, and again, farming community has their own special exemption from the minimum wage. So in my county, the minimum wage was just raised July 1st to $15 an hour. But if they worked for the farm, it was still the federal minimum wage of $7.50. And of course, there's always more research available on what is best practices and what works and what doesn't work for the populations. I wanted to create a composite case to kind of walk through how to address someone who's neurodivergent as a young adult, you know, transitioning into this phase of life issue. But thinking over my multiple clients, I couldn't come up with a composite that wasn't kind of be vague enough to not be identifiable. There are certain characteristics that overlap, but then of course, folks with ADHD and autism, it presents differently for different folks. And so it was really, I wasn't able to come up with a precise case study. There was, however, recently in the news of a young man that he was diagnosed with autism as a young age, and he was interested in the military and joined the high school ROTC program, even though when he entered the ROTC program, they said, well, you know, because you're autistic, that's an exclusion to going into the military. But if you want to do the ROTC training program in high school, so they let him do that. And his recruiter let him do that. And then they still applied, and they weren't doing it specifically to try to break down those barriers and make the news and break through. But the parents really thought that, well, since I did this, maybe this would be okay, even though the rules said autism was exclusionary. And again, this may be to old research or old misunderstanding that autism is something scary. Autism is something like Rain Man. Autism is something with someone who has emotional irregularities that would not be conducive to military life. And it was really disappointing that this particular student had gotten scholarships based on going into the military, going into college. And then the military is like, oh, well, no, sorry, son, you know, you can't because you're autistic. And then losing that funding and losing all that other stuff towards college and a vision of, I was successful as an ROTC student. And so again, this is hopeful for the future that we might be able to recategorize or come up with different strategies that, you know, might have more folks access. But again, if someone who maybe was not diagnosed but who has those characteristics, I would challenge that, yes, in the military, having that kind of structure, they thrived very well, but weren't formally diagnosed. So yeah, a lot of things to consider there. Here are some fun websites. I'm a big Twitter person. Not big and huge. I don't have a lot of big following, but that is my kind of self-care for 5 minutes between sessions to kind of peek on Twitter. And there's psych Twitter, there's med Twitter, there's ADHD, all these hashtags. Here's actually autistic, neurodivergence. I will make one note that when you use a hashtag, you want to use uppercase letters for all the words so that screen readers can read the words. If you lowercase everything, it's not as visible for folks that are visually impaired. And so one resource I came across was, what's her name? I don't know if I can click on it and it will bring up the website. The woman's name is Renee, and she was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD. And as a woman of color, it was very hard growing up being told, come on, just work harder. Come on, just sit still. Come on, you can do this. And so having had the diagnosis, having that understanding of, oh, I'm not lazy. My brain just thinks differently. And so she's created this whole blog, this whole support system, and she's created tools of fidget spinners, of a water bottle with a built-in med case, so you can have your water bottle by your bed so you can wake up and have your meds in the morning and not forget when you walk into the kitchen and have that that doorway amnesia. And that's been a very good resource that I like to share with a lot of people. I'm also a visual person again, and so comic strips have been very good about explaining this one. The second one down here is done by a German artist and just breaks down how to explain what is autism. And it has a good visual of a spectrum, not as a flat line, but as a pinwheel of different colors, and that there's 5 different areas of executive functioning. And some people have a few holes here and there, or have one of the 5 is impaired and the rest are fine, to explain more how the spectrum of autism is, that it's not high functioning or low functioning. And those are fighting words, and I will smack you if you say that. This other one, ADHDalien.com, is another comic strip. And when I read that, and I'm like, you get me, you understand that I am trying my hardest, but then I forgot my most important thing at home when I came to school to do a presentation, that I didn't do it on purpose, that I'm not trying to be difficult by asking you to repeat something, but that it is like 5 different radio stations playing at the same time. And it's hard for me to listen to just one and to remember. There is an organization that CHAD, so children and adults, children and adults with ADHD. Some of the resources are helpful, some are not. So some of my folks have Medicaid insurance. And so there are some agencies that specifically address folks with the lower socioeconomic status and Medicaid, and then some do not. And so having good providers, having good access to diagnosticians that cover Medicaid is not always possible. And then you have the other spectrum. If you say, okay, I have standard Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, but then they don't want to diagnose, or a diagnosis costs upwards $1,500, $2,000 for a full psychological eval. Another difficulty is if you have a child who was lucky enough to be diagnosed and have a 504 plan or an IEP during high school, that does not automatically translate to college. And a college wants a new diagnosis, and they want new verification of the condition before they'll authorize accommodations. What I am finding is helpful. So even if counselors are inadvertently left off of the permission forms. I, as a licensed clinical professional counselor, will still do my formal write-up to attest to this client needs accommodations, and they accept that. Not every state, not every college, they'll say, nope, you have to see a psychologist. Nope, you have to have a social worker sign off on that. So again, that's another space where advocacy for future implications can go. I want to set some time for open discussion. I'm sorry, I don't have a clock, so I'm not sure how we are on time. Oh, we have 10 minutes. So this is, are there any questions, comments so far?
I don't like that, but I don't quote it because it's not legitimate. Individuals, and I don't like it. But that's what the program is. And I'm really excited about it. And I'm wow, I'm not but this is really speaking directly to what I'm going to be doing, but already in the higher ed setting.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this is kind of
Good.
and also I want to do it. I want to do it well. I want to provide like the best opportunity. And so it's helpful in reminding me that okay, I guess I'm more prepared to do some of this than I keep thinking I don't not experience something. And it's like, no, I know. I have to keep learning.
Right.
Of course. And it's
Well, so that imposter syndrome as a new clinician, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't go away. And the beauty of doing a more client-centered approach is the client is the expert on them. And so a lot of times even with all this scaffolding of, well, you can do this and we can do this, I get a monkey wrench in there all the time. It says, this isn't going to work. And I'll say, okay, let me contact my colleague. Let me do some research. Let me see what else I can find out to see what works. And to be vulnerable to say, I don't have all the answers, or I don't know, as well as being vulnerable to say, well, I've helped other folks do this. I know you haven't applied for these accommodations before. And I hear that you're afraid that this will pigeonhole you and label you as other, but so if you don't want to apply for accommodations this semester, we don't have to. And giving the power back to the client of how do we want to go and where do we want to get there? And again, in my area in Maryland with the community college, they've done really well for some things, but on a personal note with my daughter, we went through, we did the accommodations, we did this and this, and there were some things that bothered her a lot, and she wasn't able to articulate at the time that it was too fast, too overwhelming, too confusing, that she didn't get it. And so she would shut down, she would mute, she would quit going to class. I'd say, how's it going? She's like, it's fine. And then come to learn that she withdrew after the deadline. So we lost money, and then, okay, well, sweetie, let's try this again. What accommodations would work? Well, I need this and I do better with this and I do better with this. And we went back to the disability support counselor to say, okay, how can we set things up differently? And the disability support counselor basically said, I don't think she's mature enough for college, which hurt. which hurt as a parent and hurt as someone who was trying to advocate for someone who thinks differently, processes differently, that there wasn't going to be an open space for my child to go for college. I'm like, okay, so then what do you want this person to do? Oh, that's not my decision. I can just tell you that you know, right. So she, yeah.
So frustrating.
Conversation.
Yeah. So yeah, and again, it's doing your best with your client, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. And then you put that in the toolbox for the next client. Say, oh, well, this was helpful to this one client. Oh, but that doesn't work for you. Okay, well, let's see what we can do something else. And really developing those relationships where I did know personally the disability support specialist at the community college. So I could email him and say, hey, I have a client who, what would you recommend? Or going through the whole process, because it was difficult getting into the college website, navigating their portal to set up an appointment. And pre-pandemic, I'm like, let's just walk in. Let's you and I schedule a time and we will walk in together. Or, hey, you can go with a friend, and because sometimes just a face-to-face was easier than trying to communicate over the internet. So any other questions? And I'm happy to talk offline later. This is me and all my lovely letters after the initials. I am on Twitter if you want to join me there as well. That's my email. I'm also on LinkedIn, although I don't do too much with that. But being in leadership with AIDA, I'm connected to other people, other states. And so if you needed resources here and there, I can usually connect you to somebody who knows somebody. So thank you all for coming, and I appreciate your time.